Welcome to Mark My Words, a podcast that not only aims to inspire and teach the listener about entrepreneurship, it also aims to give my guests an opportunity to talk about their unique journey in entrepreneurship and life. So join me and my guests as we meet at the crossroads on Mark My Words. Today on Mark My Words, I have a really fascinating guest who has spent the past 55 years working in the entrepreneurial and tax industry, and they have numerous achievements. And frankly, it might take the whole hour or so that we spend together just to go through that, but I will spare you that and just basically run through real quick. You will recognize my guest's last name, probably, especially since we're recording this during February and being the tax season. I'm sure you've heard his name around. He's half of the Jackson Hewitt company that he co founded. He is also founder of the Liberty Tax Service, founder of Loyalty Brands, which I can't wait to talk about and learn a little bit more. I've been reading up and studying his website and wasn't aware of what he's doing. He's doing really great things for entrepreneurs, which is a big part of what this show is about. And he also has an amazing book that I've been reading, and you're have if you're watching this on video, you'll see I compete, how my extraordinary journey for winning can be yours. And there is advice on here that just as a regular Joe who's been a manager and just working for, quote unquote, working for the man, I'm like, boy, this is spot on, amazing advice. And, I can go on and on about his accolades and, you know, he's been, you know, International Franchise Association Entrepreneur of the Year. I have to slow down a little bit. Uh, Accounting Today, top influential people. I mean, he's John Hewitt. Welcome to Mark My Words. How you doing today?
I'm incredible. Thanks. Pleasure to be here.
It's amazing to have you and to talk about your journey, not just professional journey, but journey in life. I mean, when I look at your book and read through, I'm just like, boy, there is so much advice. Like, I personally, I don't know how much my word is worth, but I'm just like, man, this is just spot on life advice, whether you're just trying to accomplish something in life or you're trying to get somewhere in your career, even if you're not an entrepreneur. So I can't wait to talk about all of that. And usually, when I start off an episode, I do my research. I like to find out things like maybe a little bit extra. And I really like to find out what makes somebody tick and what inspires them, and maybe like just their roots. And I saw, thanks to the interwebs, that you went to school, University of Buffalo, majored in mathematics. And I know for me personally, I'm very thankful for people like you, because I am absolutely horrible at math. It's amazing. I have a degree at all, but I didn't take that kind of path. But let me start off and actually give you a chance to talk a little bit and just find out, going all the way back to those days, what might have motivated you to specialize and major in mathematics.
Yeah, it was because I was really good at it, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I when I grew up. And so looking back on it, it wasn't a great, uh, very intelligent choice of majors. I'm not sure what a mathematician would do. Um, Maybe be a professor. Certainly wasn't something that I was ever going to do. But so I sort of because I was good at it and good at those courses, I kind of defaulted temporarily while I was trying to find out what I wanted to be when I grew up.
Yeah, when I saw that mathematics, it's like pretty much the same things you just said. It's like, boy, I wonder what he might have had in mind. And, if you're that good at it, for one, being a little more of like a creative, I guess, for lack of a better word, artistic. I don't really want to put myself out there too much as being artistic, but that's definitely where a little more of my ability is. I'm just like, boy, I wonder what one would do with that degree. So I'm glad that you kind of came on and had the same thought. Like, I didn't even know. So how about like entrepreneurship was I know back in those days and even me being a little younger, I always thought entrepreneurs it's like, well, that's a baller. That's somebody like Bill Gates or, name, toss out whatever name. Those are people that are entrepreneurs. You don't think about well, you didn't until today. Think about it on a much smaller scale, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it. So, was entrepreneurship at that time, did that even cross your mind?
In only in this way that through my dad had a very entrepreneurial spirit from as long as I can remember. And he was saddled with too many kids too early in life. And so we grew up poor, but I was born while he was at Michigan State. And by the time he left Michigan State, he had a fourth child on the way. So they had children very, very quickly. And being poor and my mom having to raise the kids, they didn't have a lot of money. So he never, ever got a chance to fulfill his dream of self-employment until he tried when I was in college at the University of Buffalo for mathematics. He called up and said he called up H&R Block and said, I'm interested in buying a franchise in a suburb that didn't have an office called Hamburg. And they said, well, as a matter of fact, we're going to open a company store there this year. Maybe you could have your son take our course and work for us. And so that's how I found out that's a huge blessing that I found out what I really wanted to do with my life. I just loved income taxes.
And let the record show that John is probably one of the few people to ever say how much they love income taxes. That scares a lot of people, and you have such good advice in your book and in general. So while I'm even thinking about it, I'm gonna ask if if and when anybody ever says something negative about doing taxes or thinking about taxes, do you ever have anything really positive or noteworthy that you can remember that you tell people about taxes that makes them feel better?
It makes me feel better. Well, a lot of people say a lot of negative things about tax. And the good news is that for most of the time, people pay their fair share. And you hear about a lot of chitter chatter, and I've been hearing this since I started 55 years ago. I've been hearing about flat tax and simple tax, and people. It sounds so good, but what happens is they're so mistaken. that it's laughable. So let me give you an example of why there can't be a simple flat tax. Because first of all, it's not fair. Nothing simple is fair. Fair requires complexity. But pretend there was a sales tax and the government, the US government, in order to pay they you will use a nice round number, 10%. And everything you bought, whether it was a food or appliances or cars or anything you bought, you pay 10% every single time you spent a dollar, you pay 10% for that. Well, that sounds fair, except until you think about it. That if you take someone that makes $30,000 a year, how much money are they going to spend? Well, at least 30, maybe 35 or 40. They're going to borrow money to spend more. So pretend they only spent 30,000. They're in the 10% tax bracket. Now you have someone that makes 300,000. Well, how much are they going to spend? Well, they're going to save a little. So they'll spend 270. So their taxes are just 27,000, which is 9%. So you have 10% for the poorest of people in the United States and 9% for now we're getting into towards the rich. Then you get someone that makes $3 million. Well, how much do they spend? Well, let's say they spend a quarter of their money. Or they spend three quarters or 80%. They spend 2.4 million. Well, that's a tax of 240,000, but that's only 8%. So the rich, that person that makes 3 million is paying at 8% of his income. The person that makes 300,000 is paying 9%. The person at the lowest level, below the poverty line, making 30,000, is all of a sudden paying $3,000. Now, what's in it? So it's regressive. It hurts the poor. In addition to that, Mark, it's way worse than that because in this country, 40% of the people pay no tax. 40% pay no tax. So if you're making $20,000, $30,000, you're paying no tax. Now, on any kind of flat tax, anything, there can't be exceptions or it's complicated. So on any flat tax, you're going to start paying taxes. Now, can you imagine the bottom 40 or 50% of income earners in this country when they find out they're going to start paying taxes for the first time? They've never paid taxes. How many of them are going to say, thank you, I'm so happy to pay my fair share? So I love it when people talk about fair tax. They're totally misinformed. They're totally not thoughtful about it or understand it. Once people find out about it, that it hurts the poor who you're trying to help, then it has zero chance of being implemented.
And sometimes, as I know you probably know, sometimes it's a matter of understanding something in order to relieve yourself of being upset or having anxiety. And just from reading your book, I don't even have to ask him. I feel like, you understand stuff like that. So that's one of the things that really struck me as I read your book was like, this is the kind of person that I feel like people should be listening to just about life. So I
Well, thank
really
you.
like your perspective on that.
Thank you.
And
And I've been a lifetime student and a life, especially of business. And Mark, in school they don't teach you the four most important things anymore. In middle school, high school, elementary school, they don't teach you about God. They don't teach you about being a significant other. They don't teach you about how to raise children, and they don't teach you how to be financially independent. And those are the four most important things in life. And who's going to teach you to do that? Who's going to teach you to do that? So I've been studying all of that for my lifetime and my life's long life.
and not to go down too much of a rabbit hole and get off of the agenda, but I definitely I agree with all those points. And as somebody who had kind of a wonky mathematical education, especially early on in their life, I can tell you what an impact that has. And you more or less, you mostly alluded to like the financial planning aspect, which I don't know if too many people anywhere really teach that too thoroughly, but I know just I am an absolute example of how hard it can be when math is not taught at the level that it should be. And thankfully, I found my passions and probably would have gone in the direction I went in anyway, but boy, it would have helped to have had better mathematical education for sure. So again, really, really solid points on that. And just to kind of move things along. So, just from reading up on you a little bit, it sounded like you had great experience with H&R Block. You really moved up the ranks, and I believe that was even without like completely finishing your degree at the time or at all, which is extremely impressive. And I'm sure you learned a lot of lessons that helped you to take that next step into entrepreneurship during that journey.
Absolutely. I just loved working at H&R Block because I love taxes. And one of the things, as you mentioned earlier, that most people think of doing their tax return like going to the dentist. So you relieve the anxiety. And when you're doing the tax return, many people, a high percentage of people are terrified of the IRS. They don't want, they don't want to get in trouble. And I don't want to take that because I don't want to get in trouble. And so they want someone to stand between them and the IRS. They want someone that can interpret the tax law to their benefit, that cares enough to dig for to make sure they pay the lowest tax that's honest tax. Believe it or not, most people are honest. And there's a lot of people saying there's all these scams and all the people are cheating the government, but most people are over honest. And so yeah, well, it was. I had a great career at H&R Block, and you're right. I was in my second season as a seasonal tax preparer. My boss went into the hospital with they thought he had a heart attack. Well, this was before they had anxiety attacks, and he was so stressed out by not being a good manager and being behind that he had anxiety attacks. Back in 69, or 70, they hadn't invented anxiety attacks yet. So they put him in the hospital for 2 weeks and they said, would you leave school and manage these 10 H&R Block offices with almost 100 employees? And so at 21 years old, I was and having the time of my life managing people and just loving life. And 10 years later, I was running 250 offices. So I just loved working there. That was my dream. I made my dream by 30, and then my dad intervened again, and he dragged me out of there.
So, first of all, at 21 years old, for me, I wasn't even remotely in a position of doing the kind of work you were doing. I kind of compare it to when I became a manager, which was about maybe 10 years removed from that point in my life. And I just thinking about what people are like when they're that young, and then to hear the passion and how driven you were, and just taking on such a important job like that is just really amazing. I mean, what do you feel leading up to when you left H&R Block? what was like maybe the most valuable lesson that you learned as you transitioned into entrepreneurship?
You know, when I was in high school and I looked at the huge corporations, the big companies, and back then there was no computer companies. There was no such thing as a desktop, right? That um, so there the big companies were U.S. Steel and Ford and General Motors. And when I looked at the big companies, when I thought about it, I thought the executives must be pretty smart. They must be pretty talented. They must be experienced. And I was really surprised at the the lack of talent at the very top in my career. I've been continually shocked by that most people don't aren't like I am, obsessed, fanatical, committed to improve, and they get to a point in their lives where they don't they don't want to change, and yet every one of them tells me I want to improve, but they under their breath or without they don't think about it is just don't ask me to change. So they're not reading books, they're not taking courses, they're not learning from their mistakes, let alone learning from the mistakes of others. So yeah, the biggest surprise was the ineptitude of corporate management in America.
And it's way easier to just be negative and to just kind of do the same thing over and over rather than actually putting in the work. And that, so I'm not going to sit here and say I'm the absolute most hardworking individual in the world, but I do understand the payoff in hard work. And when I log into like my day job, for example, I can't imagine not putting 110% into the day. This podcast, I couldn't imagine just, setting up the episode and, logging in, just not having done any of my homework. Like, I just can't imagine that. So I can totally relate. Like, you can see it in a lot of phases of life where that's just, I think, how a lot of people are conditioned. But I mean, if you are really being self aware and you really want it, then you're going to, I think, as you point out in your book, just don't be afraid to make mistakes. I mean, a lot of people are afraid to make mistakes, and some of the best lessons I've learned in life have been when I've made a mistake, and it's not that I want to mess up and make mistakes, but I'm always grateful for them and really take a look. And I think a lot of just like those hard truths in life are either you're willing to face it and you're willing to learn and look at yourself, or you're just gonna go through the motions. So it's
I think you
really
said something impactful that uh, actually one of the biggest mistakes is not taking a chance to make a mistake. And if you're not making mistakes, you're not accomplishing anything.
exactly. And one is kind of stupid in a way, but the quote from Wayne Gretzky, which was taken by Michael Scott on The Office, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." I'm sure there's some people who get tired of me saying that, but that's actually like really good advice. Like if you don't try, you may not know what might actually happen. You may actually accomplish something, or you may learn something. So yeah, I totally agree with that. And I am going to try to segue into, so you founded Jackson Hewitt, co-founded, and along the way, one of like a really important thing that happened was the implementation of technology into the tax world that you had a hand in. And I find that part of your story really interesting and would love to hear just a little more about that because you were really on the forefront of something that it almost sounded like some people were like, I'm not really sure about that.
Sure. When the reason I left H&R Block, and I was happy, I was very, very happy. And again, I was on top of the world. And my dad, and the only person that could have convinced me was my dad. And he was, as I said earlier, he always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And he decided that he liked the little Apple computer he bought by mail better than the mainframe that was running his public company. And he was CFO of that company. And that mainframe was filled up the room with bells, the real traditional bells and whistles, that it didn't have 1/1,000,000th of as much as my cell phone has more power, 1,000,000 times as much power as that computer did back in 1980, 79, 80, 81. And so he finally convinced me, and we left our jobs and built the first tax software for an Apple computer. No one wanted it. It was way ahead of its time. In fact, H&R Block was so visionary that when they were testing with Texas Instruments and IBM, and they, in their annual report in 1983, they're a public company, and in their annual report, they said, people ask us why we don't computerize. We say, why should we? We tried it. Customers don't care. We don't save any money. We are never going to computerize. So in 1983, they said, we are never going to computerize. Meantime, I had bought Mel Jackson Tax Service from his widow. We bought 6 offices from Mel Jackson, and we were going like crazy computerizing tax. So while the 900-pound gorilla with 9,000 offices was discarding the idea of being computerized, we were embracing it and computerizing all our stores and getting ready to challenge them, their 9,000 offices. So I was able, those 6 offices over the next 20 years turned into 6,000. And today, Jackson Hewitt, we changed the name to Jackson Hewitt. We went public, and we got to 6,000 offices, $1 billion company. And they made it easier by rejecting computerization.
And first of all, it makes a ton of sense that you had a good relationship with Apple because they are so visionary. They were since the beginning, and I can't think of a much better invention. It's a self-proclaimed person who is terrible at math than computerized tax software. I mean, there's been a lot of good technological advances in my lifetime, but man, that's got to be one of the best now that I'm actually thinking about it and we're talking about it. I'm like, holy smokes, that that saves me a lot outside of my wife being so good with math, which that definitely saves me a lot as well. So yeah, so really that's just amazing. And then from there, you went on to found Liberty Tax Service, and just kind of we'll talk a little bit about that before we get into what you're doing now. So talk a little
Sure,
bit just about the transition.
sure. After I was with Jackson Hewitt for in my 14th year, the IRS almost destroyed the industry, and it would be taking me too long to explain what happened. But it was a one-time computer error that held up everyone's refund. Not everyone, the poor people's refunds, the poor people that were our customers that financed their refund through us. were they held up the majority of them for 10 weeks. And the anger in our offices was bomb threats and guns and fistfights, and it was palpable. And it was my 50, this is my 55th year. It was the worst ever. And the venture capital used that, capitalists that own part of our company, used that as an opportunity to try to steal the company at $2 a share. And when I was able to fight that off, 2 years later, we sold it for $68 a share. So the company was sold for $483 million. He tried to steal it for $60 million. And so I had to leave the company in that fight. And so now that was a challenging point in my life, but I had built one of the top 100 retail chains in the country, and still the second largest tax service ever. I was the only person that had ever built a national tax chain to compete with H&R Block. I'd seen hundreds try over the years and failed. And so now I decided to do it again. But when I left, I had a non-compete. And the good news is that it didn't cover Canada, because Jackson Hewitt had never gone to Canada. So my non-compete just covered the entire US. And so having grown up in Buffalo, I had done Canadian tax returns. I knew how successful H&R Block was in Canada. I knew, just like in US, there was no strong competitor. So we opened Liberty Tax in Canada. And within 3 years became, just as I had in US with Jackson Hewitt, a top 100 retail chain. And now my non-compete ended in 2000. That's when I looked back at the US and said, you know what? They're messing up. They're not doing a good job with Jackson Hewitt. They're not doing a good job at H&R Block. We can beat both of them. And that's, when you think about that, that's a little crazy, because, not only are you going against 9,000 H&R Block offices, you're going to get 6,000 of my own name, my own system, my own people, my own software. And to go with my group of 5 people and say, we're going to be number one. We're going to grow faster than, not only faster than Block, and faster than Jackson Hewitt. They had 15,000 offices and we had 30. We're going to grow faster. And sure enough, so I often say I walk the tightrope of insanity, because you cannot be realistic. If you're going to accomplish great things, what's realistic to other people can't be realistic to you. And so we set out and over the next 12 years, built another public company worth $500 million, another top 100 retail chain of 4,000 offices. We're the 10th fastest growing franchisor ever, and we grew faster than H&R Block and Jackson Hewitt combined. So that was my second major effort into growing a national chain.
And first of all, that is really great advice in there that you're giving. Again, uh, just full of wisdom. And again, it would take another hour to go over all the good points that you keep making, just about, the mentality that you gotta have. Because I know for me, just ramping up, just a little podcast like this, it's like, well, that seems a little far outside of what I think before I started would be realistic for me. But once you start digging in and you're really committed and you have a little success and you're getting guests and you're having a good time, the whole world starts to open up, and it just keeps going and going and going. So, at least from this chair, I can definitely relate to that. And I'm also thinking about another thing in your book where, one of the things that really struck me, and I'm very much like, I want to control everything, and I want to I'm very resourceful, and you at one point had a realization that you needed to rely on other people. It couldn't just be done on your own or with a few people in order to grow and to see the the unrealistic quote unquote reality that you wound up creating. You needed to expand and get other people involved and let go. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit about that.
I think that's a something that people don't think a lot about. And I was just last week, I was asked by a pretty successful entrepreneur that was that. So there's just one key CEO. They had a handful of admins, but it was one key CEO, and said, "Who's the first person I hire? I mean, is it HR, human resources? Is it chief financial officer? Is it chief marketing officer? Is it chief technology officer? I mean, who do I hire?" And I said that the key is we each have our skills. And Peter Drucker, one of my favorite business authors, said people with great skills have great weaknesses. And I've been blessed with great skills. And I believe that vehemently. I have great weaknesses. For example, one of my weaknesses is I'm zero. Well, you were talking about you're not good at math, but you're good at art. I'm zero good at art. I'm zero good at detail. And so the first person or people you should hire if you want to grow like exponentially like I have is you find people that augment your weaknesses, right? If Mark, if you work for me and you and I think alike, then one of us is useless. And I'm older and I pick you. So I'm looking for people that think differently, that have different skills. And that's, if you're going to build out a robust, huge, extraordinary company, you need to have all the skill sets amongst the group of leaders.
And as you're talking about all that, I think about just my marriage. My wife has skills that I don't have, and she really compliments me in a lot of ways. Like, my life would not be as good without the skills and just the mindset that she brings to the marriage. And I know we're not really talking about having a marriage here, but I know as my podcast and my business expands, she is somebody that I lean on for that side of what I'm doing. So yeah, I totally agree with that. You gotta have people just not even in entrepreneurship, but I think back to when I was a manager, and I think you talked a little bit about how, you delegate and bring people on, as you just said, who have skills and can do things that maybe you're not as good at. And I always tried to have that mentality with hiring and with delegating. I'm just like, okay, I'm not as good with X, Y, and Z. And I don't think everybody thinks that way. So it's really great to hear that mentality. That's definitely something I think, whether you're an entrepreneur or just a manager in corporate America, or maybe not corporate America, just anywhere, that's a great mentality to have. Um, so now I want to talk a little bit about your transition to creating and founding loyalty brands, which is right behind you. And we'd love to know just the fork in the road and what made you decide to transition to this part of your life.
Yeah. I talked earlier about being lucky and taking that H&R Block course. We're being blessed. And I was a bit blessed while I was uh, after we sold Liberty, which was again my second $500 million company, and looking for something to do. I was out at dinner with one of my former employees who's a franchise attorney. And he had been my franchise attorney at both Jackson Hewitt and Liberty and gone on his own. And he had about 35 other franchisors or 35 franchisors that he was working for. And he said, why don't you get out of the tax business, John? Why don't you try? I have this one company that is, have successful franchisees. They have, it's 13 years. They only have 13 franchises. Remember, I'm building thousands. And after 13 years, they had 13. So he said, everyone's making money. It's a great industry. Why don't you go to companies like that and provide mentoring and sales support and partner with them? And so we ventured off in that way and found today we've acquired some and merged with some and discarded some. Today we have 8 different brands, 8 different franchisors as a result of that. And we try to do mentoring and provide sales support, provide cross-marketing for them. And and then I found my new great industry. I've been in taxes for 55 years. I found out pets is, I'm now, this is our 30th month of being in pets. It is so many great things about being in the pet industry.
So, as I was reading up on loyalty brands and how it actually functions, the impression that I got is that I'll just use myself and pet grooming as I hit the mic as an example. Let's just say that I had a realization that I wanted to get into pet grooming and just have my own business and have control over my life, but didn't really know how to get there, how to get started. Is that where loyalty brands, if I fill out the form, hit submit, is that where they can step in and can teach you and mentor you into that kind of direction?
That's exactly what we do. I've brought in, between all my companies, I brought in over 5,000 franchisees, and I've been so blessed in so many ways. But I think the biggest blessing in my career and my life is how many lives I've changed. That 1,000 millionaires, they had hundreds of thousands of employees. So I've changed people, gotten them great jobs, gotten them financially independent, many of them millionaires. So that's what we do. It's our job as a franchisor to set up a best system in the industry. And I've been doing that for 55 years. It's your job then. Your job is to implement that system, to follow that system. And you would think, Mark, that would be simple. That I've been doing this for 55 years, and you know where you were 55 years ago. So, and even 54 years ago, I was managing 100 people in 10 offices. So the thought that you would never know better than me is crazy. It's just, if you think you're ever going to know better than me about the income tax business, that's just crazy. And so our job is to build that system. And that's the most critical component in a business. No matter what idea you have to have a system. The thing that set Henry Ford off back 110 years ago, there were 100 automobile dealers, and he invented the assembly line. And all of a sudden, Ford grabbed 50% of the market. So there was 100 other car companies, and he, just by creating the system of assembly line, he dominated the market. And so, yeah, that's what franchisors do.
And I feel like the system that you've built, it gives a potential entrepreneur structure. And it I feel like it, at least from where I'm sitting, it makes you feel a little less, I guess, alone in the process, because I know as somebody who's just a podcaster and looking to build themselves up and don't know exactly where everything is going to take me in the long run. I mean, the structure is me. Like, it's all on me to kind of like say, okay, who am I going to listen to as a mentor? What am I blocking out? What, where am I going to take everything? And that's, I guess, a challenge that every entrepreneur has, but I at least feel like what you give under loyalty brands is at least a little bit of structure, and I think that's amazing. I mean, I'm a really resourceful person anyway, so I love the challenge of kind of building myself up and all that, but I can imagine that that's really great for somebody who is motivated and really wants to stand on their own 2 feet and have a passion, but don't necessarily know how to really get their feet on the ground. Like I think what you're doing is amazing. What a great idea.
How many years have you been in podcasting?
This is the 4th year. I really kind of started towards the end of 2019. I had people putting things into my head about just having a podcast or doing more, just creating media. And that's
How much
something I
how
do.
much better are you today than you were 4 years ago at
I
podcasting?
am leaps and bounds better.
Exactly. So think of that with franchising. What
Yeah.
happens if Mark Schmidt could go back 4 years and start all over again? And I got to do that with H&R Block. I got to do it with Jackson Hewitt. Then I got to do it with Liberty. I got to start all over again. It took all that knowledge, and our job as a franchisor is to, mind meld with you and give you all that information. And you do so much better more quickly. You save time and money because here's the system. Here's all that you can't make a mistake, Mark, in my industry that I haven't made or seen. And so we teach you to avoid all that. You said you're getting bad advice. You get bad advice. 95% of the advice human beings, Rich Dad Poor Dad, he said 90% of people give you advice, but only 5% are successful and wealthy. So why are you listening? And everyone will give you advice. You got to be, but what a great franchisor does, and there's only 10 or 20% of franchisors are great, but what they do is they give you a fail-proof system.
And just for the record, if I had gotten contacted to do this episode 4 years ago, there would have been a lot of like and and ums and uhs and it. I feel like I was pretty good, but man, just getting in there and sometimes you just gotta do it. Take the bull by the horns, which is kind of a cheesy cliche, but sometimes you just gotta go and do it and put yourself out there and give your just give your best. So as I just said a minute ago that I was better with the likes and the and owns, I'm kind of throwing all that in. Somebody told me to stop doing that, so I always think of that when I'm talking now. Anyway, I digress. We're getting close to the end of our time, unfortunately, but I'm gonna give you a chance to just tell the audience how they can find loyalty brands, how they can learn more about you and loyalty brands, and I'll give you the floor.
There's so much information available. I'm on Wikipedia. You can find me at loyaltybrands.com. We have snippets about all of our different brands, and you can even reach out to me. And you held up my book earlier. Everyone, I'll send anyone that sends me their address, I'll send them a free book if they just JOHN. Yeah, Loyalty Brands. You can see Loyalty Brands behind me at loyaltybrands.com. You send me your address and I'll send you a book,
And
free book.
I highly recommend just reaching out just for the book is just full of such great advice, life advice, and it really made me think about my own path and just could relate to a lot of what you had to say and what you have gone through just as a person in the business world. And I thank you very much for being on Mark My Words. I really appreciate your time. Had a great time chatting with you and hearing your story. And I wish you continued success with loyalty brands and everything you do, as I know you will.
Thank you, Mark. It was my pleasure. Let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely, anytime. Thank you to John Hewitt for being on Mark My Words. And again, hold up the book one more time. I Compete, How My Extraordinary Strategy for Winning Can Be Yours. And if there's anybody I would listen to, it would definitely be John Hewitt. So thanks again for being on Mark My Words, and I'll see everybody next time on the next episode. Thanks a lot, and bye for now.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks again for taking time out of your busy day to listen to Mark My Words. If you would like to connect with me beyond the show, you can find me on LinkedIn at Mark Schmidt, where I will be talking about entrepreneurship, careers, and anything else that is on my mind. You can also connect with me on Twitter and Instagram at Nimrod1979 and Nimrod79 respectively. This podcast also has a page on Instagram at Mark My Words. And finally, if you want to leave me a voicemail or check out what I'm up to with the podcast, come find me at podpage.com/mark-my-words. Thanks again for listening, and I'll be back with a new episode soon. Bye for now.